Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most elaborately colour-coded, socially enforced, and surprisingly dangerous dress codes in British history. The unwritten rules that told Regency-era English women exactly what to wear, when to wear it, and what happened to your reputation if you got it wrong. Not a law, not a statute, not a single sentence written in any official document. Just a system maintained entirely by gossip, exclusion, and a hand-coloured fashion plate arriving at a country parsonage several weeks after you'd already humiliated yourself. If one of you suggested tonight's topic, thank you, genuinely. Please make yourself comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of slow, detailed, deeply specific historical spiral. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It is reliably 4 a.m. somewhere on the map, and I respect that you are doing this to yourself voluntarily. Lower the lights, switch on a quiet fan if you have one, get comfortable, and maybe tuck the blanket up a little tighter because we're about to enter a world where the wrong shade of yellow could end your social season before it started. Have you ever stopped to think how a colour could carry the legal weight of a sentence without anyone writing it down? What exactly happens when a widow shows up to church in glossy black instead of matte black, and whether anyone was keeping track? Did the women who made the fashionable green headdresses know what the dye was doing to their hands? Could you survive an entire London season in pale pink and cream, while a married woman across the room wore deep gold and you were simply not allowed to? The chemise of Archduchess Isabella, did it really go unwashed for 3 years? And is that genuinely where that colour name came from? How do you crush 70,000 insects and still come out with a fabric that tells everyone you might be a little fast? And if Beau Brummel spent 5 hours getting dressed and sent his boots to the countryside specifically to be polished with champagne, what were the rest of you supposed to do? Congratulations. You've just woken up in London, England, 1815. Your wardrobe has opinions. All of them are load-bearing. Good luck. You stand in front of your wardrobe at 9:30, and the decision is not which dress is prettiest. The decision is which dress will tell the correct story to the correct people in the rooms you'll enter today. There are at least 4 people whose opinions matter. There are at least 6 rules that govern the choice. The dress in your hand is white, the one on the chair is cream, the one in the press is pale rose, and that's the one that's going to be argued about. Let's talk about the white one first. White muslin is the safe choice. Safe the way a very confident silence is safe, which is to say not actually safe at all, but defensible. You're unmarried. This is your 2nd season. White says you're available, uncomplicated, and haven't made any claims about yourself that you'll need to back up later. It also says you have servants to launder it, which is doing more work socially than any gemstone you could pin to it. A dress that shows every speck of London coal dust and still arrives immaculate is quietly announcing your household's entire economic position. The white dress is less a garment and more a financial statement you're wearing. The cream, meanwhile, is more complicated. Cream reads slightly older, slightly matron-adjacent. Not disqualifying, you're not ancient, but it shades toward the territory of women who've already secured their situation and have stopped performing quite so strenuously. Missus Alderton, who lives 3 streets away and is 27 and very married, wears cream with dark ribbon trim, and absolutely no one blinks. You are 20 and unmarried, and if you wear cream to the Hargrove Assembly, your Aunt Susan will spend the entire carriage ride home managing what she's seen. The pale rose is the one with opinions. It's not deep, it's not saturated, it's barely pink, more of a suggestion of pink. A pink that has been significantly diluted and has therefore lost most of its confidence. But it is warmer than white, and warmth, in this context, is a claim. The fashion press has been gesturing toward it. There was a plate in Ackerman's repository last month, hand-coloured in a colour they called blush de printemps, which is just pale rose with a French name and significantly higher cultural permission attached. The plate arrived at your cousin's house in Lincolnshire 3 weeks after the London Assemblies, where it was already considered slightly last Tuesday. Here's what no law governs any of this. England's last significant sumptuary law, the kind that actually specified what a woman of your station could or couldn't wear, was repealed in 1604. That's 200 years ago. There is no statute. There is no magistrate waiting at the door of the Hargrove drawing room to inspect your neckline. What there is instead is Mrs. Hargrove herself, who notices everything and forgets nothing, and whose opinion moves through the rooms of polite society with considerably more force than any parliamentary act. Miss Fellows, the eldest Fellow's daughter, who came out last season and is still out this season through no fault of her own, wore a dress to Lady Pemberton's card evening that a correspondent in the Morning Post later referenced, not by name, only by initials, as a shade more suited to a lady settled than a lady seeking. The initials were MF. There are not many MFS on the guest list. Miss Fellows took 3 days off from social engagements. Whether this was illness or strategy, nobody said. The Morning Post did not clarify. So you stand with a pale rose in your hand and you do the arithmetic. Who will be there? What they already think of you. Whether your mother's recent headaches count as a social explanation for anything. Whether the Hargrove drawing room has good candlelight, because pale rose in good candlelight is one dress, and pale rose in bad candlelight is a different, more alarming conversation entirely. The choice takes 11 minutes. You go with the white. The pale rose waits on the chair, patient, a little smug. You have been brought to London for what is called a season. The season is a 6-month period during which you are expected to find a husband. Your wardrobe has been packed accordingly. Every gown in the trunk is pale. White, cream, pale rose, pale blue. A yellow so light it is almost white. You are 19 years old. You will be permitted to wear deeper colours when you are someone's wife. Until then, the colours say you are available, that you are innocent, and that you have not yet been spoken for. Let's talk about what you are not wearing. You are not wearing the deep burgundy your mother owns. You are not wearing the rich gold that your married cousin brought out last October. You are not wearing the dark, saturated purple that signals, without a single word, that a woman has cleared the administrative hurdle of matrimony and can now dress like a person with opinions. Those colours are matron colours. You haven't earned them. The earning is done by standing in pale gowns in overheated rooms until someone's son decides you are worth the paperwork. The pale yellow in your trunk requires a brief note. Yellow in the Regency is complicated. A bright yellow, a vivid French yellow, vivid enough to register from across a ballroom, reads as foreign during a decade when France is actively trying to defeat your country. It also carries older residue. For centuries, yellow was the colour of public dishonour, mandated for figures society wished to mark. The pale version you've been given is safe. It is so pale it barely commits to being yellow at all. It is yellow as a suggestion, not a statement. This distinction matters enormously and cannot be explained to a French person. Miss Evelyn Ford arrives at the first assembly of the season in a gown of strong primrose. Not pale primrose, strong. She has good posture, excellent teeth, and a small inheritance from a late uncle in Bristol. None of this saves her. The Morning Post doesn't name her directly, it never does, but the phrase injudicious choice of colour for a young woman in her first season does its work efficiently. By the following Tuesday, 3 mothers have steered their sons away. The gown was French-made. This is also noted. The pale colours you're wearing serve a second function, which no one will explain to your face but which everyone understands completely. They are a kind of legibility. You are dressed to be read quickly, from a distance, by people who have roughly 45 seconds to assess you across a card room. White muslin means unmarried, presented, someone is paying for her laundry. Pale blue means gentle disposition, or at least a family hoping to imply one. The palette is basically a dating app where the algorithm is enforced by your aunt and the filters are expressed in silk. Ackerman's Repository, the fashion magazine that arrives at country houses by post 3 weeks after London has moved on, published the colour guidance for this season in hand-coloured plates. The plates are exquisite, deliberate, and quietly authoritative. Each one is individually painted. Pale blush for Mrs., it says. Jonquil for the young and unmarried only, and even then, pale. Richer shades belong to those established in life. This reaches your mother's reading chair in Yorkshire, approximately a month after the London assemblies have already confirmed it through direct social enforcement. The plate is the policy, and the policy arrived late, as policies do. You understand, standing here in your pale gown with your dance card half empty, that the colours are not decoration, they are information. They tell people what category you occupy, what you are available for, and what social latitude you are or aren't entitled to take. A woman in deep crimson at your age would be noticed. She would not be noticed favourably. Scarlet is the British officer's colour, which makes it patriotic and also masculine, and a woman who wears it risks being labelled fast, which is the Regency's politely compressed way of suggesting a very specific list of concerns. 70,000 dried insects were crushed to make a single pound of true brilliant scarlet. The colour costs a fortune, the reputation costs more. You check your gown. It is, correctly, white. You open the letter at the breakfast table and learn that your great-aunt has died in Bath. Before you reach the end of the page, you are already calculating. You know what colours you must order. You know which fabrics must be sent for. You know roughly how many months your life will now be lived in matte black. A great-aunt is not a parent. A great-aunt is not a sibling. The rules are different, and the rules are precise. You are already doing the arithmetic, and the letter is not even folded yet. Let's talk about what the arithmetic looks like. A spouse, 2.5 years, total mourning. A parent or child, 2 years. A sibling, 18 months. A grandparent, 6 months to a year. A first cousin, 6 weeks. Your great-aunt, depending on how close the family chooses to interpret the connection, falls somewhere between 6 weeks and 3 months. You will spend those weeks in deep mourning first, solid matte black, nothing glossy, nothing that catches light, and then progress outward. Second mourning allows white trim, a grey collar, a touch of lavender. Half mourning opens the door to muted purple, soft mauve, a grey violet that is close to nothing. Then, finally, ordinary colour again. It is less a grieving calendar and more a release schedule. The grief is not structured. The wardrobe is. The fabric matters as much as the colour. Deep mourning requires crape, not just any black, but specifically crape. Crape is a crimped matte silk, scratchy, stiff, and quietly unforgiving, manufactured primarily in Norwich, and it is not comfortable. It is scratchy against the throat. It smells faintly of the gum used in its making, which is the kind of smell that announces itself once and then simply lives in the room. It shrinks in rain, which in England is a logistical problem of almost daily relevance. Mrs. Alderton, your dressmaker's assistant, holds a length of it toward the window, with the careful expression of someone handling evidence. The fabric droops. It does not drape. It resists the light on principle. The discomfort is intentional. Glossy black would be easier to source, easier to wear, easier to clean. Glossy black is not permitted in deep mourning because glossy black is considered, by consensus, too festive. The shine would suggest you are enjoying something. The matte surface signals that you are not. The scratching and the smell are features of the system, not complaints about it. You are meant to feel the cloth. The cloth is meant to feel like loss. That is what you are paying for. And crape is expensive, and it costs what it costs because the suffering is the product. It's basically a soul cycle class that lasts 3 months and ends with you in mauve. Now, glossy black silk can appear in second mourning, worn carefully. By then you're allowed small white details, a cuff, a narrow collar, a bit of grey ribbon. The rule of thumb is that each transition in fabric and tone should register to any observer in the room as legible. The people at church will read you. The neighbours will read you. Someone in the milliner's shop will notice if your trim is a shade too bright for only 3 weeks in. Nobody will say anything directly. They won't have to. The observation is its own message, and the observation will travel, and by dinner it will have travelled further than you. There's a further complication, which is that crape does not mix well with other fabrics. It must be sewn as its own garment, because it damages softer silks by contact. The gum in the weave acts as a slow abrasive. So your existing wardrobe, every piece of it, is temporarily suspended. The morning dress, the carriage dress, the evening gown you had made in November in that particular shade of Clarence blue that suited you. All of it folded away, not worn, not useful, silently depreciating in the wardrobe while you circulate in a fabric that smells faintly of its own manufacturing process. Your great-aunt's death will cost you approximately 3 months of crape, a dressmaker's bill, and whatever colour you were about to become this season. You fold the letter. You ring for your maid. She appears in the doorway with an expression that means she already knows, because the letter arrived this morning and the house has already shifted slightly in its posture, the way houses do. You tell her what you'll need. She writes it down. The crape will be ordered today. You go to Jay's. or to one of the smaller mourning warehouses, and you are received with a quiet expertise that other shops do not possess. The clerks do not ask what occasion you are dressing for. The clerks know. They show you bolts of crape and parramatta and bombazine. They show you ribbons in the correct dull weave. The shop is hushed in the specific way that shops handling grief are hushed. You haven't said how recently the death occurred. They can already tell from your face. Jay's of Regent Street is not a dress shop. The brass nameplate by the door has been polished to a soft, dignified grey. The shelves are organised by stage, deep mourning nearest the entrance, half mourning furthest back, as though the room itself is structured like a calendar of grief. A clerk named Mr. Elms, whose expression has been professionally calibrated to a condition somewhere between sympathy and furniture, sets a bolt of parramatta on the counter with the ceremonial weight of someone presenting evidence. Parramatta is a silk wool blend. It drapes correctly. It costs correctly. It announces, without requiring you to announce anything, that you are doing this properly. Let's talk about what properly costs. A full deep mourning wardrobe, gown, spencer, gloves, bonnet with crape veil, black slippers, black stockings, black reticule, runs to a sum that a clergyman's daughter might spend on dress for an entire year of ordinary life. The black has to be new. Pre-existing black items are inspected and often found wanting, the wrong weave, the wrong sheen. Glossy black is too festive. The fabric is not allowed opinions about the occasion, and glossy black has an opinion. It goes back. The crape veil deserves its own paragraph because it will be present for the next several months of your life. It sits over the face during outdoor appearances and hangs from the bonnet in a length proportional to your degree of relationship to the deceased. A widow's veil is long enough to be inconvenient, which is, again, the point. It doesn't breathe. It scratches the forehead where it meets the bonnet edge. In rain, and it is England, so there is always rain, the crape contracts slightly and pulls and smells more intensely of the gum used in its crimping. You walk through London in a garment that is slowly responding to the weather in real time. Negatively. Of course, you also need the gloves. Black kid gloves, unworn, perfectly fitted. Mourning gloves have a particular problem, which is that they are black, and therefore show every pale fibre, every crease, every moment you've touched anything. You go through gloves at a rate that would alarm anyone keeping accounts, which, in a household managing grief alongside managing money, is everyone. Jane Austen writes to Cassandra about the expense of black gloves with the flat practical concern of a woman who has done the arithmetic and doesn't love the result. Back at Jay's, Mr. Elms produces a small card with ribbon samples fanned across it. Each ribbon is matte, exact, and quietly correct. He explains, without being asked, that the jet buttons are available in 2 sizes and that the bonnet trim can be completed within 4 days. 4 days is quick. You are not sure if you are grateful for the efficiency or unnerved by it. The shop is very good at this. Too good, almost. The kind of good that implies long practice and a reliable supply of occasions. The commerce of mourning runs in one direction only. Black goods cannot be repurposed after half-mourning ends. The crape was never meant to survive the grief. It was meant to accompany it, scratch through it, smell of it, and then be set aside. The bolt Mr. Elms is holding will become a gown. The gown will be worn for months through every obligation the season requires, and then it will be folded into a trunk, because the social contract has a clause about what you do with objects that have seen too much, and that clause is storage. You wear crape every day for the first months of mourning, and you discover what crape is. Crape is a crimped, matte silk treated with gum to hold its texture. Crape is scratchy against the skin at the wrist and the collar. Crape shrinks in rain. Crape smells, faintly, of the gum used to make it. Crape is famously difficult to clean. Your dressmaker has told you, with the calm of someone who has said this 1,000 times before, that some of these things cannot be avoided. The manufacturer knows about the gum smell. The manufacturer has always known about the gum smell. The best crape in England comes from Norwich, where it's been made since the 16th century, and later from Courtaulds Mill in Essex, and no one at either location has ever claimed it was pleasant to wear. Glossy black is the line. Satin, for instance, which also comes in black, is considered inappropriate for deep mourning because it's too festive. It catches light. It gleams. It suggests that you might, at some level, be enjoying yourself matte black only. The fabric must look like it is refusing to participate in the world around it. Crape refuses. Crape is very good at refusing. A seamstress named Mrs. Aldridge, who works out of a set of rooms off Bond Street and handles alterations for no fewer than 6 mourning families at any given time, holds the crape with 2 fingers when she pins it, patient, professional, and reliably done with you, as if it has done something personally offensive to her. It has. She replaces its trim after every significant rain, charges accordingly, and has developed a small economy around the question of whether the existing crape can be saved. It usually cannot. She is very sorry about this. Her expression suggests otherwise. Let's talk about what happens after the first year. After approximately 12 months of solid matte black, the rules allow a transition. Second mourning. You may now introduce white, grey or lavender trim, small amounts, at the collar, at the cuff. The black remains, but there is now a white edge somewhere on your body, and this is considered progress. A few months more and you enter half mourning, muted purple, mauve, soft violet, grey, colours that exist in a permanent state of apology. They are not quite colours, they are the idea of considering a colour. A widow's full mourning sequence runs 2.5 years before she returns to ordinary dress. A distant cousin's death requires only a few weeks of black. The system is precise. The grief is tiered. There is a chart, and the chart has been agreed upon by people you have never met, and the chart has opinions about your hemline every morning for 30 months. The crape itself was not your only problem. The crape veil, which you've already met in the rain, is separate from the crape trim on your dress, which is separate from the crape on your bonnet, which all must match in weight and dullness, because mismatched crape is noticed. A visiting acquaintance named Miss Ferrers once arrived at a condolence call with her crape trim 1 shade too lustrous, and the room registered it the way a room registers a wrong note. Nobody said anything. Everybody catalogued it. Miss Ferrers knew. You sit down in the parlour and the crape at your wrist scratches against the chair arm. You cannot forget you are in mourning. The crape reminds you when you move. It reminds you when it rains. It reminds you when you sit near enough to yourself to catch the gum smell. You wear the grief on your skin, scratching, for months on end, until the rules say you've worn it long enough. Your maid lays out the same matte gown again at dawn. The crape, folded over the back of the chair, holds its own shape and weights. You have worn solid black for several months, and now you are permitted to introduce other colours back into your dress. Not all colours, specific colours. Black combined with white, with grey, or with lavender. You may add a white collar. You may add a lavender ribbon at the waist. You may not add anything saturated, anything cheerful, anything that suggests the mourning is over before the mourning is over. The phrase for what you are doing now is second mourning, and the rules are written nowhere and yet known to everyone. The white collar is not decoration. It is a document. It tells the room that you have served the required time at the first level, that you have not rushed, that your grief is pacing itself correctly. A woman who introduced white too soon would be noticed. Not confronted, noticed. The difference matters. Confrontation requires someone to say something. Being noticed requires only that the room files it away, quietly, in the category of things that will be mentioned later when your name comes up. Let's talk about lavender. It is permitted because it is not quite a colour yet. It sits at the edge of mourning the way a guest sits at the edge of a party, present, but not fully committed to being there. True violet is still too vivid. Mauve is acceptable. Pale grey is acceptable. What you are working with is the approved palette of almost not grieving, which is its own very particular aesthetic and requires as much thought as any other. Your neighbour, Mrs. Fen appears at the Thursday assembly in second, mourning for her husband's uncle. She has a black gown with a white lace collar, a grey sash, and what appears to be a pale lavender silk reticule. She holds the reticule with the deliberate casualness of someone who has calculated exactly how noticeable it is. She has timed this correctly. Everyone agrees, without discussing it, that the reticule is appropriate. This is a small social victory. No one says so. The Ackermans repository for June has a hand-coloured plate showing a second mourning ensemble. Black gown, white ruching at the neck, a grey shawl with a narrow black border. The plate arrives at country parsonages 3 weeks after London has already moved on, slightly damp from the post, with your aunt's opinions already written in the margin. The colour descriptions in the accompanying text are precise to a degree that functions as law. A pale grey, inclining neither to blue nor to purple. The grey, apparently, has opinions about which direction it's allowed to incline. Each stage of mourning requires not just different colours but different fabrics. Second mourning permits silk, where deep mourning required only matte. The gloss returns slowly, like feeling coming back to a cold hand. You are allowed a bit of sheen now, not much, just enough that the room can see you are not entirely extinguished. The crape recedes, though not all at once, because Mrs. Aldridge's alterations go in one direction and then reverse, trimming crape borders narrower as the weeks pass, patient, precise, and quietly thorough, with the focused attention of someone diffusing something. Mrs. Penrose at the same Thursday assembly is in her 13th month for her father. Her grey shawl is correct. Her sister, sitting 3 chairs over and in her 4th week for a husband, is in solid matte black. Nobody confuses the two. You mourn your husband for 2.5 years because the schedule says 2.5 years. You mourn your cousin's husband's sister for 3 weeks because 3 weeks is what is owed. Mrs. Penrose's shawl knows the exact week it's in. You adjust the lavender ribbon at your waist and check the effect in the glass. Not cheerful, correct. You move into half mourning, and the question becomes which purple. Purple, in this period, is a category, not a colour. There is a muted, greyish, almost dust purple that is appropriate. There is a deep, saturated, vivid purple that is not. The difference between the two is a matter of intensity, a matter of dye, a matter of the angle of light when someone sees you in the street. Your dressmaker holds 2 ribbons against your sleeve and asks you to look at them in the window. You are choosing your reputation for the next 3 months. The muted one is correct. It's the purple of something that used to be darker. Lavender that remembered being violet. Mauve, which sits so close to grey that grey sometimes mistakes it for a cousin. These are the permissible shades, the ones that communicate ongoing grief without making a statement about it. The wrong purple communicates recovery. Worse, it communicates enjoyment. A woman who appears to be enjoying her purple has misjudged the calendar, and the calendar doesn't forgive. Let's talk about why true purple was expensive enough to misjudge in the first place. Before 1856, there is no synthetic dye. Tyrian purple, the ancient imperial shade extracted from murex sea snails, is, by the Regency, essentially historical. Nobody's crushing snails for a mourning dress in 1815. What exists instead is a complex layering of woad and indigo, overdyed and adjusted until the resulting fabric looks roughly like what you meant. The process is long, the result varies. 2 bolts from the same dye house can emerge noticeably different from each other, which means the purple you approved in the shop may not be the purple that arrives at your house, and neither of you can fully explain why. A dye apprentice named Josiah, 16, perpetually ink-handed, vaguely optimistic, holds a finished skirt panel against the light and squints at it the way you might squint at a word you've written and begun to doubt. He decides it's fine. He's wrong, slightly, and the difference is exactly the kind of difference someone will notice at a Thursday assembly and not mention until Friday. This is where William Perkin arrives, or rather, doesn't yet arrive. Perkin won't discover mauveine until 1856, while attempting to synthesize quinine and producing, instead, a bright purple sludge that turned out to be the first synthetic aniline dye. The Regency woman doesn't have him. She has Josiah, the woad vat, and a ribbon held to window glass in uncertain light. The whole edifice of half-mourning correctness is balanced on a dye process that isn't entirely reproducible, and yet the social requirement is precise. Half-mourning permits muted purple, mauve, grey, and violet, but the violet must be soft, not strong. It also permits a combination of these with white or black, depending on how far through the half-mourning period you are. The first months lean darker. The last month allows more white. There is no written schedule. There is only what is understood to be understood, enforced by women who are themselves navigating it and watching to see if you are too. Your best source of guidance is Ackerman's repository, which publishes hand-coloured fashion plates illustrating correct mourning combinations alongside descriptions precise enough to argue over. The plates arrive by mail, weeks after the London assemblies where the actual women wore the actual clothes. You study the plate. You assess your dressmaker's ribbons against it. You make a decision about your dress that is also, functionally, a decision about your social standing for the season. The expense compounds the pressure. Half-mourning purple in a good fabric, a soft silk, a decent wool blend, costs more than a country gentlewoman with a modest jointure would comfortably spend. You might dye an existing dress. The result is unpredictable. You might purchase a length of already dyed fabric from a draper who assures you the colour is correct. It may not be. The dye economy of the Regency is not a precision industry. It is, at its core, a series of confident estimations presented as certainties, and the person who suffers when the estimation is wrong is you, standing in a church porch in a purple that two other women have just made eye contact about. You consider yellow, and your mother stops the consideration before it goes any further. Yellow, you are told, is not impossible. Yellow is complicated. There is a yellow that an English woman of your station may wear. There is a yellow that an English woman of your station may not wear. The line between the two is not exactly visible to the naked eye, but it exists, and the consequences of crossing it are real. You ask what the line is. Your mother's answer takes the rest of the afternoon. Yellow arrives at your wardrobe with luggage. The pale, soft, straw-adjacent yellows, the ones that sit close to cream, that could almost be white in a dim room, those are acceptable on an unmarried woman. They read as gentle, modest, vaguely floral. A primrose walking dress. A pale jonquil ribbon. These are permitted. Nobody will say anything in the street. Your reputation will survive the outing. The vivid yellows are a different matter entirely. Bright, saturated, unmistakable yellow, the yellow that announces itself across a drawing room, has been accumulating associations for longer than you have been alive. During the Napoleonic Wars, which have been running for most of your conscious life, the particularly aggressive shades have acquired a nickname. They are called French yellow, not as a compliment, as a small daily act of geopolitical contempt, worn on the body. You wear it, and you are not just wearing a colour, you are wearing an opinion. The opinion is unpopular, and that's the recent baggage. The older baggage goes back further and lands harder. Yellow has medieval debts it hasn't finished paying. In various European jurisdictions across the preceding centuries, yellow was the colour assigned to mark people outside social respectability, worn by those required to identify themselves as different, dishonoured, outside the ordinary protections of community. That history doesn't announce itself at a Regency assembly. It doesn't need to. It sits in the cultural atmosphere like the smell of something that happened in a room before you arrived. You can't name it precisely. You feel it anyway. Missus. Fellows, who attends the same church as your family and has opinions at a volume disproportionate to her actual authority, wears a yellow gown to a card party in the autumn of 1814. The yellow is unambiguous. It is not primrose. It is not jonquil. It is the yellow of something that has made a decision. She is 43, married, and has presumably cleared the matter with her own conscience. She sits down at a table and arranges her cards with the practiced calm of a woman who knows she is being discussed. She is right. She is being discussed at every other table simultaneously. The discussion is not kind, but she doesn't seem to require it to be. The fashion press has calibrated guidance on all of this, delivered in the tone of a very composed person explaining something they consider obvious. Ackerman's Repository, which you receive by post roughly 3 weeks after its London readers, publishes plates in which yellow appears occasionally and carefully. A trim, an accessory, a mourning cap ribbon on a figure whose age and marital status have been selected with visible deliberation. The colour is shown, not promoted. The distinction matters. La Belle Assemblée notes in one 1815 issue that a clear amber is suitable for an evening gown on a woman of mature years. Amber, you note, not yellow. The naming is doing quiet work. The palette names rotate. The editor at La Belle Assemblée crosses out yellow on the proof sheet for the June issue and writes amber in the margin in pencil. The amber that is, optically, a saturated yellow becomes a different social object once it has been renamed. The marigold becomes a gold. The yellow becomes a citrine. It's the same colour. It has been administratively processed into respectability. Seasonal renaming is the fashion trade's most reliable trick, basically the Pantone colour of the year, except the goal is making you feel that last season's dress has developed a moral failing. Your mother's position, fully explained by late afternoon, is this. The pale straw, the primrose, the very light jonquil, these you may wear, judiciously, and only in daylight. No vivid yellow, no French yellow, no yellow that would require a second glance to determine whether it is, in fact, yellow. When in doubt, she says, choose the cream. You ask whether the cream is not simply a yellow that has lost its nerve. Your mother looks at you for a long moment. She does not disagree. You appear at an evening assembly in a yellow gown you believed was appropriate, and within the hour you understand that you have miscalculated. The yellow is too saturated. The yellow has, in the parlance of the room, French connotations. Britain has been at war with France, on and off, since 1793, and the room is full of women who have lost brothers to that war. Nothing is said directly to your face, but you can read a room. The next morning, you will write 3 letters of apology before breakfast. The room handles you without speaking. No one approaches you with a correction. No one cites a rule, because there isn't one. England's last sumptuary law was repealed in 1604, and the Regency has no legal mechanism for wrong yellow. What it has instead is Mrs. Aldridge Fentham, who stands with 2 other women near the card tables, watchful, hungry, and reliably affronted, and does not look at you directly, which is the most legible form of communication available in this room. She adjusts the ribbon at her wrist. Her companion tilts her fan. The message is complete. The fan has opinions. So does the ribbon. Yellow's trouble runs older than the war with France. Medieval European legal codes had mandated yellow or saffron-coloured garments for Jews, for prostitutes, for adulterers in some jurisdictions, a centuries-old bureaucratic habit of marking people out for public legibility. That history doesn't announce itself at your assembly, but it is present the way a smell is present in a house nobody mentions. Certain associations compost into language. Yellow as coward enters common English usage around the 18th century. The colour was doing reputational work long before Napoleon gave it a new angle. A colour renamed saffron or citrine or amber might have survived the evening. The fashion press understood this perfectly. Ackermann's Repository and La Belle Assemblée both ran regular columns explaining which yellows were admissible and which were, to use the period's most elastic adjective, not quite the thing. Country readers received those hand-coloured plates weeks after London assemblies had already passed judgment. Your gown, produced by a dressmaker in a county town working from a plate that arrived in November, has landed you in February's scandal. The specifically French charge is the sharpest edge. A woman in French yellow isn't just wearing the wrong colour, she's wearing the wrong allegiance. During the Napoleonic Wars, French association in dress functioned as a small, wearable form of political disloyalty, and the Regency press was not subtle about this. The Morning Post ran items identifying fashionable offenders by their initials, which gave everyone the satisfaction of knowing exactly who was meant while maintaining the legal fiction of discretion. The initials were never ambiguous. Everyone knew whose initials they were. The initial system was less a privacy measure and more a public flogging with better typography. Miss Philippa Vane, standing near the window with lemonade she is not drinking, catches your eye across the room and gives the very small, very specific nod of a woman who has made this mistake herself and survived it. She wears pale primrose now. She has worn pale primrose for 2 seasons. The primrose has been noted approvingly. She is not going to come over and stand with you, but the nod means something. It means the error is recoverable. It means there is a path back through the colour chart, from French yellow down through amber, from amber to saffron to a pale straw that offends no one and says nothing at all, which is, in the Regency social economy, a perfectly acceptable thing to say. You bring up scarlet at the breakfast table, and the breakfast table responds with the unified silence that means no. Scarlet is the colour of the British officer's coat. Scarlet is the colour of the soldiers who have been dying for 10 years in the peninsula. Scarlet, on a woman, reads in a specific way that you are not supposed to want to be read. Your mother does not say the word fast. Your mother does not need to say it. The scarlet ribbon you had hoped for stays where it is, and breakfast continues. The word fast doesn't mean quick. It means forward. It means too eager. It means a woman who has outrun the invisible fence that keeps female behaviour legible and manageable, and has kept on running, and appears to be enjoying it. The word gets applied to women in scarlet, women who laugh too loudly, women who arrive at assemblies without a chaperone, and, occasionally, women who are simply very good at dancing. It is a remarkably efficient accusation. It requires no evidence. Scarlet has earned its reputation the traditional way, by being everywhere the men are. The military coat is brilliant scarlet, dyed with cochineal, imported from Spanish colonial Mexico. Your brother looks magnificent in it. Your cousins look magnificent in it. At a review on the heath outside town, 500 men in scarlet coats catch the morning light and produce something genuinely spectacular, which you are permitted to admire from a carriage at a respectful distance. The colour belongs to them. On you, it belongs to no category that anyone is willing to name at breakfast. The economics are interesting and also horrifying. 1 pound of brilliant cochineal scarlet requires approximately 70,000 dried insects, harvested and crushed in the colonial highlands of Mexico, shipped across the Atlantic, processed in English dye houses, and applied to wool at considerable expense. The colour is not cheap, the colour is not casual. A woman choosing scarlet is not wandering into it accidentally, she has paid for it deliberately, which makes the choice look even more deliberate than it is. The fabric announces intention. The room decides what the intention was. A seamstress named Mrs. Draper, on Ludgate Hill, keeps a small bolt of scarlet silk on the shelf behind the counter, not displayed, behind. She will tell you it's for lining. It is sometimes for lining. She hands bolts of it across the counter with the discretion of a pharmacist filling a prescription she has mild concerns about. She says nothing. She wraps it in brown paper, neat, level, and quietly thorough. The brown paper is a kindness. The moral arithmetic runs as follows. Patriotic red and gold is fine, worn as a narrow trim on a Spencer jacket, a gesture of solidarity during the war years. Nobody objects. A dark brick red, a brownish burgundy, a muted terracotta. These carry no particular charge, especially if you're married and past 30, and the colour is well within the matron's saturated range. But brilliant scarlet, true cochineal scarlet, the red that catches light the way the officer's coat catches light, that particular shade reads as an attempt to compete with a category of spectacle you're not enrolled in. The room will decide you knew exactly what you were doing. You may have known. That is arguably worse. And yet the prohibition produces its own small rebellions. After Waterloo in 1815, Waterloo red appears in Ackermann's repository. A dark, warm, military-adjacent red that is not quite scarlet, technically, if anyone asks. It sells. Women buy it in quantities that suggest they are aware of exactly where the line is and have chosen to stand approximately 2 inches from it. The fashion press describes the colour with careful enthusiasm. Nobody says the word fast. The colour isn't scarlet. It's Waterloo red. There's a difference. Everyone agrees there is a difference and moves on. You take the dressmaker's cost book down from the shelf and turn to the page that lists cochineal. The numbers stare back at you. Cochineal is the dye that produces true scarlet, and cochineal is harvested, dried insect by dried insect, in Spanish colonial Mexico. The page tells you how many insects are required to dye a single yard of silk. It is not a small number. You do the arithmetic. The arithmetic explains, in a way nothing else has, why the women in your family who own scarlet gowns are the women who never have to ask a price. The dye makes a long journey before it reaches your fabric. The cochineal insect, Dactylopius coccus, not that anyone says this at a dressmaker's counter, feeds on prickly pear cacti in the highlands of Oaxaca. Indigenous workers in Spanish colonial Mexico scrape the insects off the cactus pads by hand, dry them in the sun, and pack them into bales. The bales go to Veracruz. From Veracruz, a ship. From the ship, a warehouse in Cadiz or Seville. From there, another ship, another warehouse, and eventually a merchant in London who sells them by the pound to dye houses who sell to textile merchants who sell to Mrs. Draper on Ludgate Hill, who sells to you, except you are not buying today. You are only looking. 70,000 insects per pound. The cost book doesn't present this as remarkable. It's a line item. It sits between indigo, per quarter pound, and logwood, per bolt, with the bureaucratic calm of a grocer's list, which makes it somehow worse. 70,000 insects is not a quantity that corresponds to any human intuition about how objects are made. A pound of cochineal is roughly the size of a thick dictionary. You could hold it in both hands. Inside it, 70,000 dried bodies, each the size of a nail head, each scraped individually from a cactus pad by someone who was paid almost nothing to do it, and who is not listed anywhere in the cost book. The dye itself, once processed, is extraordinary. True cochineal scarlet has a depth and brightness that nothing else in the period can match. Not madder red, which tends toward brick and rust. Not kermes, which is older and dimmer and mostly gone from the market by now. Cochineal red seems to hold light differently. It sits on silk like it's generating something. A gown dyed with it doesn't just catch candlelight at an assembly, it argues with the room. This is not a small distinction in an era when being seen is the entire point of the evening. The economics are quietly ruthless. A gown that argues with the room costs more than most families earn in a quarter. The dye alone, before the silk, before the cut, before the trim, runs to sums that would cover a modest household's fuel bill for a winter. So you have an object that is simultaneously the most visible colour in a candlelit room and the most expensive colour in the cost book, which means the people wearing it are advertising two things at once: that they found the red and that the red was never a question. It's a little like a car where the colour option alone costs more than most people's cars, except the car is a dress and the colour is legally sourced from a colonial insect death economy. A dyer named Mr. Fitch. His receipts survive in a textile merchant's ledger held in a collection no one visits. Records purchasing £4 of cochineal in the spring of 1814 for a commission that goes unspecified. He notes, in a margin, that the current price represents an increase over the previous year and that the Spanish shipping disruptions are the cause. He does not comment further. £4 of cochineal is 280,000 insects, Mr. Fitch writes this down and moves on. His handwriting is neat, even, and quietly indifferent. Madder can approximate the direction of red, and it does so at a fraction of the price, which is why madder-dyed fabric dominates the working and middling market. But madder red and cochineal scarlet are not the same colour in the same way that a pencil sketch and an oil painting are not the same image. They share a category. They do not share a room. The fashion press knows this and says so with the delicacy of someone pointing out that your hat is on fire. You are shown a green silk at the draper's that is more vivid than any green you have seen on a fabric before. The shopkeeper calls it emerald. The shopkeeper does not mention what makes the green possible. The dye is called Scheele's green. The dye is a compound of copper and arsenic. The shopkeeper does not say arsenic, but somewhere in the back of the shop, an apprentice is unpacking another bolt with hands that are not entirely steady. Your mother considers the bolt for a long moment, and then asks to see something else. Carl Wilhelm Scheele, a Swedish chemist, discovered copper arsenite in 1775. He was not trying to make a dress fabric. He was doing chemistry, and the chemistry produced a colour so saturating, so insistently alive, that within a generation it was everywhere. Wallpaper, artificial flowers, headdresses, ribbon, and silk. It was the most vivid green anyone had ever worn. It was also, in moderate quantities, quietly destroying the people who made it. Nobody announced this. The colour was just very good at its job. The artificial flower makers then? Not as a category, as a room. A room in London or Paris, off a street that doesn't have a particularly promising name. A woman named Eliza, seated, not by choice but by physical necessity, dips wire stems into dye that has the copper arsenite already worked into it. Her hands are the colour of a bruise, have been for some time now. A rash that started at the wrist has migrated. She does not know the word arsenical. She knows that her hands hurt and that the work is available and that the alternative to the work is a different kind of problem. The flowers she makes are beautiful. They will be worn in someone's hair at a dinner she will not attend. The wearers weren't entirely safe either. A headdress packed with Scheele's green flowers sat close to the face all evening, shedding arsenical dust with every movement, every turn of the head. A warm ballroom accelerated this. Your skin might redden. You might develop what a physician would call, with tremendous professional calm, a rash of uncertain origin. Nobody connected the green flowers to the uncertain origin because the flowers were fashionable and the connection was inconvenient. The green was called emerald. The rash was called coincidence. The gap between cochineal and Scheele's green is instructive, and not in a flattering way. The 70,000 insects per pound of scarlet that you heard about in the dye houses, that number was a supply chain problem, a logistics problem, a price problem. It was not a bodily problem for the people wearing the finished cloth. Scheele's green was a bodily problem at every stage. Workers suffered to make it. Wearers absorbed it. The flowers looked cheerful. They were not cheerful. They were a delivery mechanism with petals. Of course, the fashion press did not print warnings. Ackerman's Repository published a plate in 1817 showing a pale-complexioned young woman in a green silk evening gown with artificial flowers at the shoulder. The plate was hand-coloured. The colour was precise and vivid and clearly the point. No note accompanied the plate. A note would have complicated the plate. Complicated plates were not what subscribers in country parsonages were paying for. What they were paying for was permission, the permission of a printed image to want a thing, to name a thing correctly, to walk into a draper's shop and say "emerald" with authority. The plate arrived weeks after the London season it depicted, slightly delayed by the distance from London to wherever you were, and by the time it reached you, the colour had already moved through ballrooms you weren't in. The gown in the plate was simultaneously the latest thing and a historical document. You held it anyway. The green was still vivid on the page. The paper did not mention what made the green possible. Your mother's instinct at the counter, to ask for something else, was not knowledge. It was something adjacent to knowledge, a hesitation without a name. The bolt goes back on the shelf. The apprentice with the unsteady hands unpacks another. The shopkeeper pivots to a Pomona green, which is a different green, a safer green, a green made from weld and woad, which does nothing worse than fade in sunlight. It is less vivid. It is considerably less likely to express opinions about your nervous system. You buy 3 yards. The emerald stays on the shelf, being beautiful and quietly terrible, and waiting for the next customer who doesn't hesitate. You order a headdress for the assembly at the end of the week, and the dressmaker mentions, in passing, the women who make the artificial flowers. The flowers are dyed green. The flowers are pinned into your hair at the back where they cannot be easily reached. The women who make them work in a small room above a shop in Soho, and they have, by all accounts, very bad hands. Your dressmaker does not elaborate. You don't ask. The headdress will be delivered on Thursday. The hands are the thing you don't think about. You think about the flowers instead, how they'll catch the candlelight, how they'll sit against your hair, whether the shade reads closer to Pomona or something more yellow adjacent, which would be a problem. You think about whether Miss Hartley will be wearing the silk rose arrangement she debuted at the Carrington Assembly, which was frankly too much, and whether your flowers will read as a considered response or merely as an echo. You think about all of this. And you do not think about the hands. The hands, in any case, look like this. A woman named Margaret, she's perhaps 23, perhaps younger, it's difficult to tell after 2 years in the room, sits at a table with a small wire frame and a pile of fabric petals, each one pre-cut, each one dipped in the green dye that the workshop buys by the cask. She pinches the wire stem, she shapes the petal, she breathes in. The green is copper arsenite, which is Scheele's discovery, which is the same compound that is slowly converting her fingertips into something that no longer looks like fingertips. She shapes another petal. The candle is close enough to see by, far enough that the wax doesn't drip onto the work. Margaret has learned exactly where the candle should sit. Margaret has learned a great many things that are not useful outside this room. Margaret has shaped perhaps 400 petals this week. The workshop produces perhaps 40 headdresses a week during the season, and each one takes between 4 and 6 hours of combined labour from the women at the table. The copper arsenite doesn't wash off cleanly. It deposits in the skin over time, works into the tissue around the nail beds, causes what the physicians of the period describe as chronic inflammation, and sometimes note no further because there isn't a further there prepared to commit to paper. Margaret is not named in the physician's note that briefly described her wrists last winter. She is described as a flower maker. Occupation sufficient. Details not required. She picks up another petal, pre-cut, slightly waxy, faintly mineral, and folds it against the wire. Your headdress arrives Thursday, as promised, wrapped in tissue in a flat box. The flowers are very well made. They are a convincing green, vivid, with a slight waxy sheen that reads as botanical from 3 feet away. Up close they have the faint mineral smell of the dye, which you notice once and then stop noticing because the assembly starts in 2 hours and you have not yet done your hair. A girl named Sarah, who helps with the dressing, pins the headdress into place with 5 pins, 2 of which she has to reposition because the angle was wrong. Her hands are fine. She works with thread and fabric, not pigment. At the assembly you stand near the window for a while because the room is warm. The headdress sits where it was pinned, which is a small mercy, because you have worn arrangements that shifted through the evening like something with its own ambitions. Missus. Pemberton asks where you had the flowers made. You tell her. She nods with an expression that means she is filing this for future reference. This is how a recommendation travels in 1814. No intermediary, no note, Just a woman at a window telling another woman a name, and the workshop in Soho receiving another order the following week. The order arrives. Margaret shapes another petal. The candle is exactly where she has learnt it should be. You sit down with the new issue of Ackerman's repository the day it arrives, and you study it the way a clerk studies a ledger. The fashion plates are hand-coloured. The fashion plates describe what is being worn in London this month. Each plate is accompanied by a paragraph naming the colours precisely. Your dressmaker will be working from this plate within the week. Your mother will be quoting from this plate within the hour. You read the captions twice, because the captions are the part that determines what your next gown will be. Ackerman's is, in the plainest possible terms, Instagram, with a 3-week delay and a horse. The issue in your hands was printed in London. It travelled to you by mail coach, which means the London assemblies it describes have already happened, the gowns have already been evaluated, and the women who wore them have already received their verdicts. You are reading a record of completed social transactions. You will act on it anyway, because the alternative is showing up in something nobody has named yet, which is its own kind of social statement and not a good one. The colour paragraphs are not descriptions. They are instructions, delivered in the language of description so that no one has to admit they are instructions. A round robe of Pomona green crape over a white satin slip trimmed with Erling's lace at the hem. That sentence tells you what Pomona green is, who makes the correct lace, what goes under the crape, and implicitly, quietly, without saying so, what a woman who appears in last season's African Grey has done to herself. The paragraph doesn't say you've made an error. It simply makes clear what the correct answer is, and leaves the arithmetic to you. A Miss Fairweather at a country assembly in Shropshire would have no way of knowing what was correct without this. She can't get to London. She has no relation with a townhouse she can visit. What she has is Ackerman's, arriving once a month, crumpled, faintly mildewed, and quietly authoritative. She smooths the page. She holds the hand-coloured plate to the window light. The colours are applied by hand in the printing shop. A team of women and girls, each responsible for a single colour across an entire print run, working from left to right across stacked sheets. The Pomona green on Miss Fairweather's plate was applied by someone who has never been to an assembly either. This does not make the colour less authoritative. The plate knows what it knows. The naming itself is commerce. Clarence blue becomes Waterloo blue after 1815, which is basically Pantone colour of the year, except the entire point is making the dress you bought 6 months ago feel like a historical artifact. The battle is won, the colour is renamed, and your Clarence blue walking dress now announces, without your permission, that you stop paying attention in June. The names cycle through royalty, through victories, through sentiment. London smoke, Waterloo red, Pomona green, African grey. A new name costs nothing to print and costs you the price of a new gown. Your mother sits beside you and reads over your shoulder. She has opinions. She has opinions about the pale rose in plate 4, which she says is suitable, and about the deep gold in plate 7, which she says is not. The deep gold is not suitable because you are unmarried. Deep gold is for married women, which you know, which she knows you know, but the plate has offered the temptation, and the temptation must be addressed formally. You are 17, and you are permitted pale pink, pale blue, white, cream, and a yellow, so light it barely qualifies as a colour. The plate knows this too, which is why the gown in plate 7 is modelled by a figure with an elaborate married hairstyle and a proprietary expression. The figure is not you. The figure has a husband. She sets her finger on plate 3, pale muslin with a blue sash. Appropriate. Correct. Legible to every woman in any room you enter this season, as the dress of a girl who is available and has not yet formed opinions that would inconvenience anyone. You look at plate 3 for a long moment. You tell your dressmaker about plate 3 in the morning. You live at a country parsonage in Hampshire, and your fashion arrives by post. The hand-coloured plate from Ackerman's reaches your hall table 3 weeks after the London ladies who set the styles have moved on to something else. You do not know this. The gown your dressmaker is currently making, in the precise shade of blue described in the current plate, will be modish in your village when it is finished. It will be outdated in Mayfair. You will not be told, and you could not do anything about it if you were. The plate itself is a small miracle of labour. Someone in London has hand-coloured each copy individually, a process requiring multiple sessions, multiple colourists, and a degree of consistency that is, frankly, not always achieved. The blue on your plate is slightly darker than the blue on your neighbour's plate. Her dressmaker and yours will produce two different gowns from the same described shade. Both women will believe they are correctly dressed. Both are, by London standards, already wrong. The text that accompanies the plate describes the colour in language that sounds precise and isn't. A clear cerulean blue, pale as the morning sky, suitable for a young lady of quality attending an evening assembly. This tells you the colour, your age category, your class, your occasion, and your marital status in one sentence. You have received an instruction. It arrived dressed as a compliment. Mrs. Alderton, your neighbour's wife, the one who reads the plates aloud to her daughters every month with the seriousness of a magistrate, has already noted that cerulean was Clarence blue last season and something else the season before that. She says this to no one in particular while adjusting her spectacles. Her daughters nod. The information has nowhere useful to go, but Mrs. Alderton deposits it anyway. For the record, the country parsonage is not the only place dealing with this delay. The Ackermans' plates reach market towns, cathedral closes, and the better farmhouses of the home counties on the same approximate schedule, which is to say, late. The magazine is basically Instagram, except every photo is hand-painted, 3 weeks behind, and arrives by horse. The horse is not apologising. The horse has a full schedule. Of course, the delay compounds in another direction too. A colour introduced in the October plate has already been replaced in the November plate by the time October's issue reaches Wiltshire. You order the fabric. The fabric arrives. Your dressmaker cuts. By the time you appear in the finished gown at the local assembly, the shade has been quietly demoted in London from fashionable to merely acceptable. You are wearing acceptable. You are wearing it with confidence. These two facts exist in polite tension. What you do with the plate matters as much as what's on it. You study it. You pass it to your sister. Your sister holds it to the window for better light because the parlour lamp is insufficient for colour judgment, a problem that has never once been acknowledged as a problem in any written account of Regency life, but which was constant. She pronounces the shade viable. You agree. The plate is filed. The dressmaker is summoned. You have a fabric budget. The fabric your budget allows is not always the fabric the plate describes. You make substitutions that are invisible to the village and catastrophic only on the paper of the plate itself, which is now sitting in your sewing basket. Silently aware of the gap between its cerulean and your actual cerulean, the plate does not comment. The plate just sits there, freshly coloured, faintly damp, and slightly smug. You enter the London draper's shop and the first thing you notice is that the prices are not subject to discussion. There is no haggling. There is a small printed card next to each bolt of fabric, and the number on the card is the number that will be charged to your account. This is a new arrangement. The older shops in your village still expect bargaining. The newer London shops do not. The shop assumes you are a woman who would not lower herself to negotiate. You behave accordingly. The bolts are arranged by colour. This is not accidental. The pale end of the shop, white muslin, cream sarsenet, blush pink. The thinnest woven ice blue occupies the front windows where the light comes in. The deep end holds the burgundies and the dark greens and the strong gold silks. You can tell a great deal about who the draper expects his customers to be simply by which end of the shop they walk toward without pausing. Young women hover near the windows. Matrons go straight to the back. The draper watches both. He does not comment. He doesn't need to. The junior assistant, not Mr. Fowler, who handles the accounts and speaks to married ladies of consequence, is the one who deals with you. His name is Thomas, he's maybe 19, and he carries bolts of fabric from the shelves with the careful, weary, and quietly authoritative motion of a man who has learned exactly one skill but has learned it completely. He sets a length of pomona green across the counter in front of you and smooths it flat with one practiced motion, then looks at you sideways to assess whether the colour is doing what it should. It isn't. He knows this before you do. He reaches for the Clarence blue without being asked. The colour names require their own moment of attention. Pomona green is apple green, named for the Roman goddess of fruit, which sounds poetic until you realise the name was chosen because last season's colour name had expired its usefulness. Clarence blue references the Duke of Clarence. Waterloo red appeared in the season after 1815 and made every bolt of dark red from 1814 feel vaguely unpatriotic by comparison. The names rotate the way Pantone rotates its colour of the year. except the entire purpose is making the dress you bought 8 months ago feel like an embarrassment you're choosing to wear in public. The bolt in front of you is the current name. The bolt in the back of the shop, marked down, is last season's name for the same colour. You are being asked to care about this distinction. You find, to your own mild horror, that you do. The muslin is where things become genuinely complicated. Indian fine muslin, what the trade calls woven air, or sometimes running water, is still available if you know where to ask. It's so sheer that a full length of it can be folded into a matchbox, which sounds like a sales pitch and is. But the Lancashire machine-woven cotton is half the price and can sustain laundering without disintegrating, which is a practical consideration that the matchbox demonstration is designed to make you forget. Thomas does not volunteer which is which. You're expected to know. If you don't know, you're expected to ask in a tone that implies you already know and are simply confirming. Your account is noted in a leather ledger behind the counter. Not your husband's account, your account, tied to his credit, but tracked under your name because you're the one who shops. The number in that ledger will travel home with you in the form of a quarterly bill that arrives on a Tuesday with the same cheerful indifference as weather. The Married Women's Property Act won't exist for another 50 years, which means nothing in that shop legally belongs to you, including your choices. You pay anyway. You choose well. The whole transaction proceeds on the polite shared fiction that this is simply what Tuesday is for. You wore Clarence blue last season. This season, the same shade of blue is being called Waterloo blue. The dye has not changed. The fabric has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the name printed under the plate in Ackerman's repository. Your gown from last season is, by official designation, outdated. Your dressmaker is preparing a new gown in the new shade, which is the old shade. You understand, dimly, what is happening to you. You are still going to order the new gown. Ackerman's repository arrives by post. It comes to country parsonages, to the drawing rooms of minor gentry, to the sitting rooms of women who have not been to London in 3 years and are making careful social calculations based on hand-coloured illustrations that are already 6 weeks old by the time the paper dries from the journey. The plates are beautiful. They are also the legislation. A woman in Shropshire is looking at a plate of a woman in a Waterloo blue reading goat, and she is already mentally apologising for her Clarence blue pelisse, which has not left her wardrobe since Tuesday. The plate doesn't explain the rule. It doesn't have to. The rule is the plate. The naming itself is the most elegant part of the operation. Clarence blue was named for the Duke of Clarence, which gave it a respectable 4 syllables and a royal adjacency. Waterloo blue arrived in the summer of 1815 with the battle still in the papers, which gave the draper a reason to print new cards, the dressmaker a reason to quote a new price, and you a reason to feel simultaneously patriotic and obligated. It's the Pantone colour of the year, except the goal isn't inspiration, it's making last season's wardrobe feel like a small personal failure. The colour is the same. The invoice is new. Mrs. Alderton, your neighbour, has already been to the warehouse on Henrietta Street and come back with 3 yards in the new designation. She mentions this at cards, not loudly. She doesn't need to be loud. She holds her hand over the table, calm, deliberate, and quietly pointed, and the sleeve says the rest. You are holding a hand of reasonable cards and a 4-month-old pelisse, and both feel slightly inadequate. Of course, the names don't just chase battles. They chase everything that has recently happened in public life. Pomona Green sounds botanical and restful. London Smoke sounds fashionably urban. African Grey sounds travelled. None of these names tell you what the colour actually looks like with any precision. They tell you what you are supposed to feel while wearing it. Erling's Rust is named for a lace maker, which sounds specific until you realise Erling's Rust and last year's Burnt Sienna are standing next to each other on the counter and only one of them has a new card. The card is the product. The colour just comes with it. There's a secondary market in this naming economy that nobody writes down but everybody operates. A gown that is outdated in name is still perfectly functional as a garment. You know this. Your housekeeper knows this. The fabric doesn't know the battle has been named after it and has consequently become mandatory. So you wear the Clarence blue gown to morning calls in the country and you commission the Waterloo blue gown for anything that might be seen by anyone who subscribes to Ackerman's. This is the same logic that governs keeping your good china for guests while eating off the everyday set at breakfast. It is rational. It is exhausting. It is also, in its quiet way, a very precise measure of how closely you are being watched. The fashion plates also carry quieter instructions embedded in the descriptions beneath the image. A morning walking dress of Pomona green jaconet muslin tells you the occasion, the activity, the fabric weight, and the color designation in 11 words. It is a more efficient dress code than most employers issue today. If the description reads suitable for a lady of middle years, you understand that the color has been categorized, and you understand which side of that category you are expected to occupy. Young women look at plates of matrons in deep gold and make a mental note. Not yet. Matrons look at plates of young women in pale blush and make a different mental note, which they are too polite to say aloud. The new gown arrives from your dressmaker wrapped in brown paper. The colour is your Clarence blue. She has written Waterloo blue on the invoice in a careful hand. You hold the fabric to the light. The light agrees with you that nothing has changed. You sign the invoice anyway. You ask the dressmaker about a deep burgundy that has caught your eye in a fashion plate, and the dressmaker pauses before answering. The dressmaker does not say no. The dressmaker says, instead, that the colour is more suitable for a married woman. The conversation lasts approximately 15 seconds. You leave with a paler rose. The burgundy bolt is rolled back up and returned to its place on the shelf. You walk home in pale rose, and you understand, more clearly than you did this morning, what the dressmaker meant. You are on your second London season, which means you've been assigned the same palette you had at your first: white, pale pink, cream, pale blue, and a light yellow so diluted it barely commits to being a colour at all. These are not suggestions. There's no list posted anywhere. No magistrate enforces them. England's last sumptuary law was repealed in 1604, which means 2 full centuries have passed since anyone could actually arrest you for wearing the wrong shade. The enforcement mechanism now is your mother's expression, and the way Lady Harrington's eyes move from your hem to your face and back to her tea. The rule, stated plainly, is this: pale colours signal innocence and availability. Deep saturated colours, dark red, rich gold, strong blue, deep purple, signal worldliness. You haven't earned worldliness. Worldliness is issued at the altar. Miss Philippa Crane arrives at the Hanover Square Rooms in a gown of soft ivory with a blush pink sash, and the room decides she's charming. You arrive in the pale rose, the dressmaker approved. You are also charming. The room is full of charming pale women. It is a little like a watercolour left out in the rain. All the saturation has drained to the edges of the carpet where the matrons sit in deep garnet and midnight blue, radiating the quiet authority of women who have already made their choices and stopped performing availability. Mrs. Farley, who has been married to Mr. Farley for 11 years and shows no visible remorse about it, wears a gown of deep plum that would have caused a minor social incident on your frame 2 seasons ago. She adjusts her cuff with the flat confidence of a woman who no longer needs to convince anyone of anything. The plum gown does not explain itself, neither does she. The Married Women's Property Act won't exist until 1870, which means right now, in 1814, you own nothing, and will continue to own nothing until you are legally attached to someone who owns things. Your mother arranges your pale rose sash with a practiced flick, neat, level, and quietly thorough. And the gesture is a job interview conducted entirely through fabric swatches, repeated weekly, over the course of however many seasons your family can afford to fund. You wear pale rose because pale rose communicates that you are unclaimed and pleasant, and not the sort of woman who makes inconvenient decisions. This is, apparently, a selling point. Your maid kneels beside your gown the morning after the assembly and lifts the hem to the window. She finds a faint smudge near the seam, from standing too close to a fireplace probably, and her mouth tightens. White muslin requires constant laundering. Pale colours show every mark, every shadow, every evening near an open flame. A smudge on a pale gown is a fact about your household. A smudge on a dark gown disappears entirely. Deep saturated colours are, among other things, practical, which may be exactly why they're reserved for women who've already secured their position and can afford to stop being legible. You will, if things go according to plan, graduate to those darker shades eventually. A dark red in 2 or 3 years, perhaps, after a wedding and a year of establishment. By 40, a deep sapphire, if the complexion permits. The colour progression runs in the opposite direction from mourning. Instead of moving from black toward colour, you move from pale toward depth, from available toward arrived. Both progressions are managed by the same mechanism, the pause before the dressmaker answers. You appear at an assembly in a deeper rose than you have worn before, and someone, a married cousin, a friend's mother, a hostess of long standing, finds a moment to take you aside. The correction is delivered in the gentlest possible language. You are told in so many words that the colour is a little advanced for your situation. The conversation is brief. The conversation ends in agreement. You thank her. You return to the room. The rest of the evening proceeds as though nothing has happened, and you understand that something has happened. There is no rule book. That is the first thing to understand. England repealed its last sumptuary law in 1604, which means that by 1815, not a single statute governs what colour you put on your body. No magistrate will fine you for the rose. No court of law has an opinion about your sash. What you have instead is your married cousin reading you a verdict in a corridor and then going back to the punch bowl. Your married cousin sets her gloved hand briefly on your sleeve as she speaks, light, careful, and quietly unmistakable. The correction is not about the colour, precisely. It is about what the colour announces. A deeper rose, worn by a young woman in her second season, reads as a claim to a complexity of character, a history, an interior life with some weather in it. Married women wear those colours because they have already been selected. They've won the auction, so to speak. You have not. And arriving at the auction in the auctioneer's clothes is, socially speaking, a procedural error. The correction is delivered kindly because it has to be. Cruelty would make a scene. A scene would ruin the evening. Ruining the evening would be worse than the rose. So the married cousin gathers everything into a soft envelope of concern. She uses phrases like, perhaps next year, and you have such lovely colouring in the pale shades, and the advice lands exactly as intended, not as an attack. As a door, quietly closing, Mrs. Penhallen, that is the hostess, watches this exchange from across the room without appearing to watch it at all. This is a skill she has been developing since approximately 1793. She adjusts the candelabra on the mantel. It didn't need adjusting. She adjusts it anyway, and from that angle she can see the corridor, and when you return to the room she notes your expression and files it somewhere useful. Ackerman's repository arrives by mail at country parsonages 3 weeks after London assemblies have already rendered judgment. A plate from the repository shows a married woman of fashion in deep gold and a young woman beside her in cream, the contrast deliberate, the message legible without a caption. Country readers study these plates the way people study instruction manuals for furniture they've already assembled wrong. And the colour names in the plates don't help you anchor yourself in time, because they change. Clarence blue becomes Waterloo blue after 1815. African grey becomes London smoke by the following season. Your dress from last year, which cost your father something he did not mention at breakfast, is now a colour with no name. The dress is fine. The dress is just somehow, quietly, no longer the point. You return to the assembly. A young man asks you to dance. You accept. The rose is, in the end, very pretty. Nobody says this. Nobody needs to. The candles are warm, the room is full, and your married cousin is already talking to someone else. The correction already absorbed into the general hum of an evening that has decided, collectively and without a vote, to move on. Your family votes Whig. Your gowns, during the weeks of the election, are blue and buff. Blue and buff are not arbitrary choices. Blue and buff are the colours of Charles James Fox, and beyond him the colours of the American Revolutionary uniform, which Fox publicly admired. To wear blue and buff is to advertise, on your person, your father's politics. The Tory women across the room are in red and gold. Nothing is said. Nothing needs to be said. The room is divided into 2 colour-coded armies before anyone has spoken. Your wardrobe, this week, has been audited. You have a blue silk you wore to the Hartley dinner in February, which was not a political occasion and which you chose because it suited your complexion. It now suits your family's parliamentary allegiances as well. This is convenient. You also have a buff-coloured morning gown, which is less festive but technically correct. You wear the silk. The buff gown stays home. Nobody told you to make this calculation. You made it the same way you know which fork is for the fish, Mrs. Alderton, 3 chairs down, is wearing a deep Tory red that would on any ordinary evening read as fashionably matron. Tonight it reads as a statement. Her husband holds a seat that's being contested. She sits very straight. The red is doing a great deal of work for a woman who hasn't said a word since the soup. Nobody is being asked to do any of this. There is no pamphlet. There is no directive from the party offices. There is simply a shared understanding, running through the room like a current, quiet, total, and stubbornly precise, that your dress is a declaration and your silence is a vote. You are, in effect, a Tesla bumper sticker stitched onto silk, except this bumper sticker has a good waistline and has been complimented on its embroidery. Of course, the system has limits. A woman in wig blue can't actually canvass. She can't speak at the hustings. She can't vote, and won't be able to for another century and change, which is a detail the room prefers not to examine too closely. What she can do is appear at the right assemblies in the right colours, pour tea with wig conviction, and ensure that any Tory wife who looks across the room sees a unified front of cornflower and champagne. It is, in its way, the most elaborately costumed powerlessness in England. Political colour-wearing has a longer history than the current election. Wig blue and buff have been circulating since Fox's great campaigns of the 1780s, when Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, canvassed in person, kissing voters, which scandalised everyone, and appearing in blue and buff, which scandalised nobody because by then the palette was simply part of the vocabulary. You are 40 years downstream from Georgiana, and the room still runs on the same colour logic. Fashion changes. Faction colours are apparently eternal. A young woman named Miss Philippa Carew sits near the window in a pale primrose gown and looks uncertain. Primrose is not wig blue. Primrose is not Tory red. Primrose is a woman whose father voted differently from her intended, and who has not yet resolved the wardrobe consequences. She holds her fan with both hands. She opens it. She closes it. The fan has no opinion on the matter. By the end of the evening, you've had 4 conversations that were entirely about the candidate's merits, and entirely about the women having those conversations, simultaneously, in the way that Regency social life specialises in. What you wore tonight will be noted. What Mrs. Alderton wore will be noted. Miss Carew's primrose will be noted, and filed under questions that answer themselves by June. The election results will matter to the men. The colour results will matter to everyone else. You are invited to a drawing room at a wig hostess's house, and your mother dresses you, without comment, in a buff sash. The sash is a signal. The sash says you understand the room. There is no formal requirement that you wear buff. There is, however, a strong informal expectation. The hostess will notice immediately who has dressed for the politics of the room and who has not. The women who have not will be received politely and remembered slightly less warmly. A wig drawing room is not a meeting. There's no agenda. No one stands at a podium. It's a sitting room in a very large house, full of women in expensive fabric, eating small things off small plates, and conducting a form of politics so refined it doesn't look like politics at all. It looks like a Tuesday evening. The hostess, Lady Holland say, or the Duchess of Devonshire's circle, now a generation older and still keeping count, moves through the room with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly what she's doing, which is everything. Your buff sash is doing its job. It sits at your waist, below the high empire line, and it reads, to everyone who knows how to read it, as allegiance, buff and blue. The colours of the Whig cause, named after the uniforms of the American revolutionaries, adopted by Charles James Fox, worn by Georgiana across 2 decades of campaigning, and still, in 1814, meaningful enough that your mother chose it without explanation and expected you to understand. You do understand. That's the point. Mrs. Alderton, a woman in dark Prussian blue with an expression like a closed ledger, crosses the room and takes your hand. She approves of the sash. She doesn't say so. She doesn't need to. She holds your hand half a second longer than required, and that half second is the entire conversation. This is how information moves in this room, not in sentences. In pauses. Lady Holland writes down nothing. She writes down everything. By Thursday morning, the cousin from Derbyshire, who happens to be looking for a wife with good political instincts, will be introduced to the girl in the buff sash, and not to the girl beside her. He has no idea any of this is happening. He is, at this exact moment, eating a small thing off a small plate. His mother, who is slow, deliberate, and quietly thorough, is writing names in a little book. Ackerman's repository has been publishing colour guidance for 5 years at this point. Hand-painted plates arriving by mail at country houses weeks after the London season has already moved on. Which means your aunt in Shropshire is reading about Waterloo Red in November, when London has already quietly retired it. She arrives at Christmas wearing exactly the wrong thing, with complete confidence. The fashion press giveth and the fashion press taketh away, and the taketh always happens first. You adjust your sash. It sits exactly where it should. Mrs. Alderton catches your eye from across the room, tips her chin almost imperceptibly, and returns to her conversation. You have been approved. It cost your mother 4 shillings of ribbon and a specific silence on the subject. Both of you know this dance too well. You are to be presented at a court drawing room, which means everything you wear is dictated by a tradition older than your grandmother. A train of a specific length dragging behind you. White ostrich feathers in your hair, 3 of them, arranged in the prescribed manner. A gown of a sober colour appropriate to your unmarried status. Long white gloves above the elbow. The whole arrangement is heavy. The whole arrangement is awkward. The curtsy, you have been told repeatedly, is not the part you should be worried about. The colour of the gown is doing significant work today. You are unmarried, which means pale. Cream, white, pale blush, the faintest blue that still technically counts as blue. You are not permitted, by the unspoken agreement of everyone in the room, to wear anything that announces opinions. Deep gold is an opinion, rich burgundy is an opinion. Strong violet announces that you have lived a life, and you have not, or at least you are required to perform as though you haven't. The gown says, I am available, pleasant, and not yet complicated. The gown is lying on your behalf, and everyone present understands this. The train is exactly the required length, which your modiste measured 3 times because presenting an undertrained train at Sreet. James's palace is the kind of error that appears in letters for the rest of the decade. A woman named Miss Fellows presented in 1814 with a train that someone subsequently described as abbreviated. She was not ruined by this, but it was mentioned. It is still being mentioned now, in 1816, by women who were not present for the original event and are working from second-hand accounts. Your maid, Dorrit, spent 40 minutes this morning pressing the feathers individually with a cloth that had been warmed to a precise temperature she refuses to explain. She holds each feather up to the window after pressing it, tilts her head, and exhales. Then she does it again. The feathers have, at this point, absorbed more of Dorrit's professional anxiety than any feather should reasonably be asked to hold. The presentation itself lasts approximately 45 seconds. You move forward, you sink into the curtsy, which is, in practice, the part you should have been worried about, and the Queen or her representative nods in a way that acknowledges your existence without committing to a position on it. Then you back out of the room without turning around, which requires navigating your train via spatial memory alone, like parallel parking in a ball gown in front of people who are professionally trained to notice everything. Lady Castlereagh, watchful, patient, and reliably affronted, sits along the wall and notes who entered in what colour. She does not have a notebook. She does not need one. She is, in her way, next door in human form, with a 40-year archive and a permanent guest list. When Miss Henley walks in 3 weeks later in a deep gold that no unmarried girl should be wearing, Lady Castlereagh's mouth tightens by about a millimetre, and she begins, that very evening, the slow work of not inviting Miss Henley anywhere worth attending. Miss Henley will spend the next 6 months wondering why her correspondence has thinned. Nobody will explain it. There is nothing, technically, to explain. No law, no warden, just the collective memory of a room full of people with very good recall and a great deal of time. You make a morning call, which is the formal visit to another woman's drawing room that establishes or maintains a social acquaintance. The dress for a morning call is specific. You wear a walking dress, sober, in muted colours, with a pelisse over it for the street. You do not wear evening dress in daylight. You do not wear bright dress to a house you do not know well. The mistress of the house will read your dress before she has read your card. The reading will be complete before you have crossed the threshold. The time is not actually morning. Morning calls happen between noon and 3 in the afternoon, because morning in Regency parlance means the part of the day before you've changed for dinner, which could be quite late. You arrive having already dressed once for the street, and you will dress again for the evening. This is your second costume of a potential 4. The day has a wardrobe budget and you are already spending it. Your pelisse depends on your status. If you're married, it can be a stronger colour, a deep bottle green, a sober burgundy, the kind of blue that has given up trying to be cheerful. If you're unmarried and in your first or second season, You wear something paler. Not white, which is for evening. Not the bright poppy you saw in Ackermann's last month. Something between those two things. Something that says you have taste but not ambitions you haven't earned yet. Your aunt would describe the correct shade as becoming. She uses that word the way a magistrate uses a gavel. Mrs. Alderton, whose drawing room you are currently attempting to enter, has been receiving callers since 12:30. She sits near the window with a slightly elevated posture that she has maintained for 40 minutes without adjusting. She holds a teacup in a way that communicates she could hold it indefinitely. When you hand your card to her footman, she doesn't look up immediately. That pause is information. It tells you where you stand before you've said a word. The 15-minute rule governs everything. A morning call lasts approximately 15 minutes. You do not stay longer unless explicitly pressed to, and being pressed to stay is itself a signal. It means you've passed the initial assessment and she's decided you're worth the expenditure of a further quarter hour. Leaving too soon reads as disinterest. Staying too long reads as desperation. Both will be discussed. The drawing room is, in this sense, less a room and more a timed examination with upholstery. Your dress will be evaluated against 3 variables: the house you're visiting, your marital status, and the occasion. A morning call is not a rout. It's not an assembly. It requires a specific register of sober but not drab, which is its own narrow corridor of acceptable colour, about as wide as your pelisse ribbon. Wear something too bright and you've signalled either ignorance of the code or contempt for it. Wear something too dull and you've signalled poverty, depression, or a complete failure of effort, all equally inadvisable. None of this is written anywhere. There's no pamphlet. Ackermann's repository will tell you what fashionable ladies are wearing in their morning visits, and the hand-coloured plates arrive at country parsonages by mail roughly 3 weeks after London has already moved on, which is basically Instagram, except every photo is painted by hand, and the algorithm is your mother's second cousin. The knowledge that matters travels through observation and correction. You learn by wearing the wrong shade once and watching Mrs. Alderton's expression not change, flat, level, and quietly final, in a way that communicates volumes. The call ends. You stand at the correct moment, which you've timed. You gather your gloves, which you haven't removed, because removing your gloves signals an intention to stay that hasn't been confirmed. Mrs. Alderton rises fractionally, a social unit of approval, and says something warm but brief. You have done adequately. You leave the card. You will find out later, through a third party, how the dress was received. Outside on the pavement, your police does the remaining work. It covers the morning dress from street-level observation, protects the fabric from coal dust and worse, and presents a single coherent outdoor silhouette. A woman on the street is always also a woman being watched from windows. The pelisse is the outer argument, the dress beneath is the private one, revealed only to those already inside the room. You walk past your housemaid in the corridor and you observe what she is wearing. The dress is dark grey, the apron is white, the cap is white. The colours were not chosen by the housemaid. The colours were chosen by your mother several years ago, and the housemaids who have come and gone since then have all worn the same uniform. You do not yourself dress the servants. The servants are dressed by a system you live inside, and the system has different rules for you and for her. Dark grey, navy and brown are the colours of the working household, chosen not for aesthetics but for 2 very practical reasons. First, they don't show dirt, which matters when your housemaid is on her knees at the grate before 6 in the morning. Second, they mark rank at a glance, so that anyone arriving in your entrance hall knows immediately who lives here and who works here. The uniform is not unkind. Exactly. It is just very clear about what it thinks of you. Your cook wears brown, your parlour maid wears the grey. The lady's maid, who occupies a curious intermediate territory, closer to you in daily proximity than any other servant, wears something slightly darker than grey but not quite black. She handles your dresses, laces your stays, and knows which shade of blue you wore to the Worthingtons and whether it was admired. She is not permitted to wear that shade. The line is unspoken. It holds anyway. No household manual lists forbidden colours for servant dress. No page in any ledger says a parlour maid may not wear jonquil yellow. Your mother simply raises an eyebrow at the new under-housemaid Hetty, who has come up from the country with a sprigged muslin tucked at the bottom of her box. And by Tuesday Hetty has packed the muslin back into the box and is wearing the grey. Your mother said nothing about the muslin. She didn't need to. The eyebrow did the work. the way a one-star review on Yelp does the work, slowly, quietly, and across an entire network of households comparing notes. Mrs. Pilcher, the housekeeper at a house 3 streets over, is said to have appeared once at a Sunday service in a deep garnet wool, not her working dress, her own dress, purchased with her own wages. The garnet was admired by no one in the pew who mattered. It was mentioned afterwards. She remained housekeeper. The garnet did not reappear. You and Hetty pass each other on the stair every morning at the same hour. You are in pale primrose, going down. She is in dark grey, going up with a coal scuttle. Neither of you chose what you are wearing. Hetty steps aside, because she's the one carrying the scuttle. You nod, because that is what a nod is for. Your pale primrose is doing the work of being seen correctly. Her dark grey is doing the work of not being. The stair handles both at once and asks no questions. Working women outside the domestic household had still fewer resources. A seamstress, a milliner's apprentice, a laundress. These women wore whatever dark, hard-wearing fabric could survive their work and their wages. They had no uniform to signal their position because their position required no signal. The dye on a washerwoman's dress was not chosen for social meaning. It was chosen because it was cheap and because it would not show the grey of the water she stood in all day. And yet the colour codes followed them too, in the other direction. A working woman who dressed above her station, who appeared in a printed cotton too bright, a ribbon too fashionable, attracted the same raised eyebrow that met Mrs. Pilcher's garnet, but with sharper consequences. A working woman who looked prosperous was assumed to have acquired the prosperity improperly. The colour became evidence. The colour was always evidence, for everyone, in every direction. The washerwoman puts her dress on in the dark, and the dress already knows what it is for. You walk through the market on a Friday morning and you see a woman in a red shawl. She is selling apples. She is not respectable in your sense of the word. She is also, possibly, not anything she is being read as. But the red shawl is the entire vocabulary the street has for her, and the vocabulary is decisive. The reading happens in less than a second. The reading is not subject to appeal. The market knows what it has decided about her before she has named her price. Red, in 1815, is the officer's colour. The British military officer wears scarlet. That is his red. It signals courage, rank, national loyalty, and the specific kind of violence the Crown has authorised him to perform. It is a masculine red. It belongs to him by commission. A woman wearing that same colour is borrowing something she hasn't been issued, and the street notices the borrowing immediately. The word the street uses is fast. Not fast as in quick. Fast as in loosely tethered. Fast as in insufficiently anchored to the social expectations a woman of her position is supposed to occupy without complaint. It is one syllable. It does a lot of work. Now the woman in the red shawl may have inherited it. She may have bought it second-hand from a rag fair stall in Petticoat Lane for 3p, from a pile of goods that arrived with no history attached. The shawl may be the warmest thing she owns, which in a London February is not a trivial consideration. None of this is legible from the outside. None of this is asked. The colour has already given its testimony, and the colour is not cross-examined. The arithmetic of colour, for this woman, is punishing. The pale-wearing, unmarried woman in her first season is performing innocence from a position of relative safety. She has a family, an address, a social structure, willing to read her generously. The working woman in the market has none of that infrastructure. She can't perform innocence through pale colours because pale colours show every smudge of a working life and she knows it. But she can't wear saturated colour without being read as claiming something she isn't entitled to. The palette available to her is, functionally, the palette of invisibility, dark, dull, already dirty-looking. And even that palette is a trap, because the moment she steps outside it, she's the red shawl woman, and the street has already voted. A costermonger named Nell, 3 stalls down from the apple woman, wears a dark green kerchief, practical, faded, and reliably forgettable, knotted at her throat. She adjusts it every few minutes, pulling it tighter, as if the knot is doing something structural. It isn't, but the gesture is practiced. Green is safe. Green is vegetables. Green says nothing the street is going to remember. Scarlet's association with moral impropriety was older than the Regency, and more layered than the military uniform. Medieval sumptuary codes had mandated certain colours for prostitutes in various jurisdictions across Europe. yellow in some cities, red in others, and that residue didn't dissolve when the laws did. England repealed its last sumptuary law in 1604 and replaced it with nothing. Nothing official, anyway. What replaced it was the collective memory of what certain colours had meant, carried forward in the muscle of social reflex rather than the text of any statute. The law left. The reading stayed. The cochineal scarlet, worn by a fashionable married woman at a Mayfair assembly, cost approximately 70,000 dried insects per pound of dye, harvested in Spanish colonial Mexico and shipped across an ocean. That red is a different red from the market woman's second-hand shawl. They are the same wavelength of light. They are not the same colour. The Regency understood this distinction perfectly, even without articulating it, and enforced it accordingly. The apple woman names her price. You move on. The shawl stays where it is, doing what the street has decided it does. She'll be home before dark, which is the one piece of advice anyone would have thought to give her, and which she didn't need, because she already knew. You are at the draper's looking at a fabric called woven air. It is fine Indian muslin, hand-spun in Dhaka, shipped through a chain of ports to a London warehouse and laid out on the table in front of you. The fabric is so fine that the shop assistant can pass it through a small brass ring on his finger. The price is enormous. The Indian weavers who made it are, you have heard, being put out of work. You do not ask by whom. You do not, in fact, ask anything. You write down a number of yards. The full name, in the Mughal textile catalogues, is Ab-e-Rawan, running water. There are others, woven air, evening dew. These are not marketing copy. They are technical descriptions. The fabric is so thin it can be folded into a walnut shell, so light it floats when you breathe near it. A dress made from it in an English January is, medically speaking, an act of faith in the resilience of the human constitution. Thomas Trotter wrote about it in 1807. He had opinions. The muslin had more. What you are actually purchasing is whiteness, which in 1813 is doing a lot of symbolic work simultaneously. White muslin signals classical antiquity, marble, Grecian draped figures, the whole neoclassical project squeezed into a morning gown. It signals purity, which is useful if you're unmarried and being evaluated. It signals servants, specifically the number of servants required to wash it without destroying it, because fine white muslin becomes grey at approximately the third laundering if handled by someone who doesn't know what she's doing. The dress announces income by announcing inconvenience. A wardrobe you cannot maintain yourself is a wardrobe that proves a point. The shop assistant, his name is Mr. Fossey, and he handles each bolt with the practiced reverence of a man who knows the price to the shilling, unfolds another length across the counter. This one is slightly heavier. Lancashire cotton, machine woven. He does not say it is the same. He implies it is nearly the same. You look at both. The darker muslin has a quality the Lancashire piece doesn't, a softness that isn't quite texture, more like the absence of resistance. Mr. Fossey smooths the Lancashire bolt with his palm and says the word serviceable. The word serviceable, in a draper's shop, is a small burial. The Calico Acts were repealed in 1774, which technically opened the English market to Indian cloth. What the repeal did not do was make Lancashire calm about it. Arkwright's water frame was already running by then. Hargreaves's spinning jenny was already in use. The machinery was doing what machinery does, which is make more of a thing faster and cheaper than human hands can, and the human hands in Dhaka are currently learning this at some velocity. You do not think about Dhaka while standing in the draper's shop. The draper's shop is warm and smells of sizing, and the street outside is cold. There is a practical limit to what you can be expected to contemplate before 11 in the morning. The fashion press has already told you what to want. Ackerman's repository ran a plate last month, hand-coloured, pale blue on white, a walking dress with a gathered hem, and the colour note in the accompanying text specified Indian muslin, as opposed to the Lancashire imitation, in the particular way that means a woman of discrimination would know the difference. The plate arrived at the parsonage 3 weeks after the London assembly it was illustrating. By the time you saw it, the dress it described had already been worn, admired, and slightly improved upon. You are always, in some technical sense, shopping for last month. You write down more yards than you planned. The fabric sits on the counter between you and Mr. Fossey, nearly transparent in the window light, waiting. It has crossed 4,000 miles and at least one economic catastrophe to get here. It asks nothing of you except that you acknowledge it is beautiful, which you do, and that you can afford it, which you mostly can, and that you not think too carefully about the weavers, which you won't. The purchase is complete. The muslin is folded into paper. You step back out into the cold. The draper shows you another bolt of muslin. This one was woven in Lancashire on a machine called a water frame. The Lancashire muslin is coarser than the Indian. The Lancashire muslin is also less than half the price. Both bolts are described in the shop, with practiced neutrality, as fine cotton. Your dressmaker will use whichever you choose. Your mother, observing both bolts, makes a face that is not quite a face. The decision is yours. The decision is also, in some way you cannot fully name, political. The water frame is the machine doing the undercutting. Richard Arkwright patented it in 1769, and by the time you're standing in this draper's shop, it's been running for over 40 years in mills along the rivers of Lancashire and Derbyshire. The machine spins cotton thread faster and more uniformly than any hand in Dhaka ever could. The thread isn't as fine, the thread isn't as forgiving, but it is relentless, cheerful, and patriotically present, and it has opinions about market share. Meanwhile, back in what the English press tends to call the East, the weavers of Dhaka are having what you might describe as a difficult decade. The Calico Acts, which had at various points banned or taxed Indian cloth imports to protect English wool and silk, had been repealed by 1774, but machine cotton doesn't need a protective tariff. It just needs to be cheaper. It is cheaper. It is considerably cheaper. The Dhaka weaver who produces a yard of Abirawan, the fabric named woven air, so fine it takes months, cannot produce it at a price that competes with a mill that runs 24 hours and doesn't require sleep. The mill does not require sleep. This is the mill's primary competitive advantage. Your mother's face, in the draper's shop, is doing several things at once. She is calculating. She is also performing a kind of loyalty, though to what exactly is unclear, to England, to economy, to the idea that quality means something, or simply to the version of you that arrives at a drawing room in fabric that doesn't pill at the elbow by October. Mrs. Pemberton, your mother's closest friend, once appeared at a Thursday evening in Lancashire muslin. So fine she had convinced herself it was Indian. It wasn't. A woman named Mrs. Grafton noticed. Mrs. Grafton mentioned it to someone. Someone told someone. Mrs. Pemberton hasn't worn white since. The Indian muslin, running water, evening dew, names that sound like someone composing poetry in a very light breeze, requires servants to launder it correctly, a warm, dry room to store it in, and the kind of careful handling that is itself a signal. You don't rough-wash woven air. You don't bundle it into a trunk. The fabric communicates not just that you own it, but that you have the household infrastructure to maintain it, which is the more expensive part of the statement. The Lancashire version communicates that you are sensible, or that you are trying, or that the difference between them is too small to matter, which is itself a position that not everyone in the room will forgive. A dressmaker named Miss Cutler, who operates out of a narrow room above a bootmaker's on Henrietta Street, handles both. She runs her thumb across the Lancashire bolt first, then the Indian. She doesn't say anything. Her thumb does. She sets the Indian bolt aside with the specific deliberateness of someone who has already made the decision and is waiting for you to arrive at it independently. The Lancashire muslin sits on the counter with the mild resignation of a thing that knows it will probably be chosen. The fashionable press, naturally, has views. Ackerman's Repository, which arrives at country parsonages 3 weeks after London has already moved on, distinguishes between the finest Dhaka muslin and good British cotton in terms that are admiring of both and informative to neither. The hand-coloured plates show white. The white is luminous. The plate does not specify the thread count. The plate is optimistic about thread count in a way that fabrics sometimes cannot sustain in practice. You hear, in confidence, that a certain missus somewhere in town has been dampening her muslin gowns before wearing them, so that the fabric clings to her figure. The rumour is repeated in 2 separate drawing rooms before noon. The rumour may be true. The rumour may have been invented by a woman with a grudge. The rumour may have been imported wholesale from a French scandal of a decade ago. None of this matters, because the rumour is now circulating, and circulating is what rumours do. The dampened muslin panic isn't really about muslin, it's about whether women are allowed to have outlines. The allegation, and by the time it reaches you, it is already an allegation, is that certain fashionable women in London have been wetting their underpinnings, or the gown itself, before stepping into a carriage, which causes the thin white fabric to settle against the body like a second skin, or possibly a first skin. The distinction is the entire problem. Thomas Trotter, a physician with strong opinions and a very productive 1807, has already published his diagnosis. Fashionable muslin is causing constitutional weakness in English women. The cold, the damp, the nearness to the body. The English winter has not consented to being ignored in this way, and the English winter is winning. The thing is, Trotter isn't entirely wrong about the cold. White muslin suitable for evening, especially the finer Dhaka varieties now giving way to Lancashire machine cotton, offers approximately the same thermal protection as a whispered apology. You wear it through December. Your hostess's drawing room is heated by one fireplace that has been asked to do something it cannot do. You are not dampening your muslin, you are simply damp. The distinction has collapsed in transit between your body and everyone's imagination. Missus Alderton, she is standing near the window, which she always does because it gives her a view of both doors, leans toward her companion and repeats the name. Not the full name, just enough of the name. Her companion nods in a way that contains an entire essay on the subject. England's last sumptuary law was repealed in 1604, and there is nothing on the books about the moisture content of evening dress. The enforcement happens through the nod, through the partial name, through the repetition that happens before noon. Now, the French connection is doing real work here. Dampened muslin gets called a Parisian practice, which in 1813 is essentially a synonym for morally unmoored. France has Napoleon. France has the Directory. France has, allegedly, women who wet their gowns on purpose. England has the Morning Post, which has opinions. The fact that French fashion journals report no such epidemic is irrelevant. The rumour doesn't need a French source. It just needs a French address. The woman most likely to be accused is not the one who dampened anything. She's the one who wore the thinner fabric, or the one who is simply built in a way that white muslin declines to conceal. The gown is doing nothing unusual. The gown is being observed by people who have decided what it means, and the gown has no defence counsel. Georgiana Foss, she's 22, in her second season, wearing a cream-white evening dress that Miss Cutler finished only last Tuesday, watches two women across the room conduct an entire conversation about her using only eyebrows. She straightens her back, she lifts her chin. She is, technically, doing nothing wrong. This is not the same as being safe. Trotter, at his writing desk, sharpens his pen and worries about lungs. Mrs. Alderton, at her window, worries about morals. Both agree that thin white fabric on a woman is a problem requiring a response. The response, depending on who's responding, is either a wool pelisse worn over the muslin at all times, or a quiet word delivered through a mutual acquaintance, careful, partial, and quietly ruinous. The quiet word is harder to remove than the pelisse. By evening, the rumour about Missus has acquired a specific street, a witness, and a quantity of cold water. None of these details existed this morning. The rumour is now load-bearing. You read, in a magazine that your aunt has lent you, an excerpt from Dr. Thomas Trotter's recent treatise on the nervous temperament. Dr. Trotter is concerned, professionally, about the white muslin gowns being worn through English winters. The gowns, in Dr. Trotter's view, are not warm enough. The women wearing them, in Dr. Trotter's view, are courting a constitutional weakness that will follow them the rest of their lives. The magazine reproduces 3 full paragraphs. Your aunt has marked the most alarming sentences with a pencil. Dr. Trotter published his treatise in 1807, which means he has been concerned about your muslin for several years before you have had any opportunity to wear it. He is not a tailor. He is not a moralist exactly, though the line between medicine and morality in 1807 is approximately the width of a crape ribbon. He is a naval physician who served at Trafalgar and emerged from that experience with professional opinions about cold, exposure, and the human body's catastrophic inability to regulate its own temperature when insufficiently clothed. He applied this expertise to ballrooms. Presumably no one asked him to. The treatise does not merely observe, it diagnoses. Women in thin muslin, Dr. Trotter argues, are developing weakened lungs, susceptible constitutions, and nervous disorders that cascade through the body over time. The language is clinical, which somehow makes it worse. A limb going cold is mentioned. A pallor is mentioned. A trembling that begins in the extremities and works inward. He is describing an evening at Almack's as though it is a battlefield casualty report and the casualties are wearing empire waist gowns. Your aunt has underlined the word delicate in a way that suggests she considers it an insult. The irony is considerable. The white muslin gown exists precisely because it makes you look like classical marble, cool, pale, and untouchable. Marble does not have a temperature. Marble does not catch a chill. You, however, are not marble. You are a person standing in a Derbyshire assembly room in January with three-quarter sleeves and a single silk shawl that the fashion plates have prescribed as the correct accessory for exactly this situation. The shawl weighs approximately 4 ounces. Doctor Trotter would have thoughts about this shawl. The thinnest Indian muslin, the fabrics called woven air or running water or evening dew, names that sounded poetic in the warehouse and feel actively menacing in February, offers warmth in the same way a rumour offers facts, technically present, doing essentially nothing. You have worn a gown that a draft can read through, and the morning papers have praised the silhouette, and Dr. Trotter has written it into medical literature as a public health crisis. All three of these things are true simultaneously. You attend the local subscription ball in your best white gown and a cashmere shawl you have borrowed from your mother. You stand near the fireplace because you have read Dr. Trotter's excerpt too, via your aunt, via a different magazine, 3 weeks after London. You are warm enough, you tell yourself. You are warm enough. The fire pops. You adjust the shawl slightly and do not catch anything. This is not the story Dr. Trotter wanted to tell. Your aunt taps the pencil against the page and lingers on one phrase. A woman with a weakened constitution, Doctor. Trotter implies, is a woman who has exercised poor judgment about her own body. The poor judgment about the body is adjacent to other poor judgments about the body. You do not have to read very closely to understand that constitutional weakness is doing a great deal of work in one phrase. The diagnosis arrives dressed as medicine. It is wearing its best clothes. They are not muslin. The magazine closes. Your aunt retrieves it. She says nothing, specifically, about your dress. She looks at your dress. She looks back at you. She has the expression of a woman who has made her point without technically making her point, which is its own form of cold, and requires no treatise. You hear the news of Princess Charlotte's death by letter, and within 24 hours the entire country is dressing for it. Princess Charlotte was the Prince Regent's only legitimate child. Princess Charlotte was 21. Princess Charlotte died in childbed, along with the infant, in November of 1817. The mourning that follows is not court mourning. It is national, voluntary, and total. Your dressmaker has been delivered an order for 3 black gowns by the end of the week. 3 is more than you would have ordered for a parent. The shops run out of crape in 2 days. Not low stock. Out. The drapers of London post notices in their windows explaining that new shipments are expected, and the notices are apologetic in the way that only commerce can be when it has genuinely failed a nation in grief. The crape that does arrive smells of gum and arrives in bolts that are slightly wrong, too glossy, too smooth, not sufficiently matte, and you send your maid back with instructions because glossy black is festive, and festive is a different category of problem entirely. Charlotte was popular, which helped. Charlotte was young, which helped more. Charlotte was the direct heir, which meant her death did not just grieve people, it panicked them. The Prince Regent was estranged from his wife and had no other legitimate children. Your father reads the news aloud from the paper at breakfast and sets the paper down with the slow, deliberate, slightly bewildered care of a man who has just understood that a door has closed behind the country and will not open again. A haberdasher named Mr. Fitch on Bond Street receives 47 requests for black ribbon in a single morning. He writes this down because he cannot believe it. He weighs the ribbon on a postal scale, the kind meant for correspondence, because his proper ribbon scale is buried under bolts of Parramatta, and the postal scale will simply have to have opinions about fabric now. Mourning has stages, and Charlotte's death sends the whole country into deep mourning simultaneously, which is the social equivalent of a controlled detonation. Deep mourning means matte black only, Parramatta, crape, bombazine, with no jewellery except jet, no lace except black, no ribbon except black, no trim that catches light in any way that suggests you might be enjoying yourself. The crape scratches, it smells. It shrinks in rain, which is inconvenient in England. a country that has strong opinions about rain and weak opinions about timing them. You wear it anyway. For a widow mourning a husband, the full progression runs 2.5 years. Deep mourning, then second mourning, black with white, grey, or lavender permitted. Then half mourning in muted purple, mauve, and violet. Then ordinary colours again, reintroduced slowly like a patient recovering from something structural. Charlotte was not your relation. Charlotte was your future queen. The correct mourning duration is publicly unspecified, which means it is enforced by observation. You watch your neighbours. Your neighbours watch you. Ackerman's repository will publish guidance by its next issue, but the next issue is 3 weeks away, and 3 weeks is enough time to have gotten it wrong in front of everyone who matters. Queen Charlotte, the king's wife, not to be confused with the princess, dies the following year, November 1818, 2 royal deaths in 13 months. The country layers one mourning onto the next before the first has fully resolved, which means some women spend the better part of 2 years in black and grey and muted violet, cycling through the stages without ever quite arriving at colour again. Your lavender dress, the one you had made specifically for second mourning, is now doing double duty as a kind of permanent compromise garment. It is the dress that means someone has died, but not just now. You stand in front of the wardrobe one morning and count the black bodices. There are 4. You count the lavender. There are 2. You add the grey muslin, which is doing the work of a black gown, when the black gown is at the laundress's. Your maid stands behind you holding a brush and waits for the count to end. The count does not end. It becomes its own small ritual, repeated weekly, less ceremonial each time. You have barely returned to ordinary colours when Queen Charlotte dies in November of 1818, and the whole performance begins again. Queen Charlotte was the wife of George III. Queen Charlotte had spent the last years of her life largely confined to Windsor with her ailing husband. The Queen was not, in life, a fashionable figure. The court enters formal mourning regardless. The court mourning radiates outward into wider society. Your dressmaker reorders crape from Norwich before you have finished reading the announcement. The timing is, to put it plainly, inconvenient. You have been in half mourning for Princess Charlotte since the spring, muted mauve, grey, a cautious lavender ribbon, and were approaching the outer edge of what decorum requires. Another 13 months of full obligations would have been excessive, and yet here you are, back at the beginning, back in matte black. The crape is exactly as scratchy as you remembered. It smells, as it always smells, faintly of the gum used in its crimping, the way a library smells of old paper except considerably less pleasant and considerably more present against your collarbone. The mathematics are straightforward and unkind. A Queen Consort of England requires court mourning. Court mourning requires you, even if you have never been within 40 miles of Windsor, even if your connection to the royal household is limited to having once admired a portrait, to dress accordingly. The signal travels from St. James's outward through the fashion press, through the morning papers, through a letter from your cousin in London who has already been to her dressmaker twice. Ackerman's repository will publish guidance within the fortnight. The guidance will be thorough. The guidance will not ask whether you can afford it. A woman named Mrs. Pell, your neighbour's wife, the one who manages her household accounts with the focused expression of someone diffusing a small explosive, had finally sent her black crape to be stored after Princess Charlotte's mourning concluded. She had it pressed, folded, wrapped in muslin, and put away in the cedar chest at some personal ceremony of relief. It came back out the following Tuesday. She said nothing about this. She wore it to church without comment. The crape looked, if anything, more matte, sullen, and aggrieved than she did. The practical consequence of 2 major deaths in 13 months is that you have spent nearly all of that interval either in deep mourning, second mourning, or half mourning, with approximately 6 weeks of ordinary colour in between. 6 weeks in which your pale blue walking dress saw genuine use. 6 weeks in which you wore your amber pin without strategic calculation. Those 6 weeks are over. The amber pin goes back in the box. The box has opinions about this, though it keeps them mostly to itself. Queen Charlotte was 74 and had lived a long and largely ceremonial life. The grief across the country is real, but not quite the raw, specific devastation that followed Princess Charlotte. A young woman, a future queen, a baby lost alongside her. This mourning has a different texture. It is more dutiful than inconsolable. People wear the black because you wear the black. because the court wears it, because the fashion press says so, because not wearing it is a conversation you don't want to have at the next assembly. The crape scratches with the same indifference to emotional nuance. It doesn't calibrate. You stand at the wardrobe again and lift down the same black bodice you packed away in April. The cedar smell is on it, and a faint crease across the shoulder where the muslin wrapping rested. 2.5 years for a widow, you remember. 2.5 years measured from the last death, not totalled across both. Your maid hands you the pins without looking up. The crape does not know it was worn last year. The crape has never once taken prior service into account. You follow Queen Caroline's trial in the newspapers through the summer of 1820, and you find yourself paying particular attention to what she wore each day. The dresses are wrong. The dresses are deliberately wrong. Queen Caroline has returned to England to claim her position as Queen Consort, and her husband is trying to divorce her by Act of Parliament. She is being judged in a room full of men. She is responding by dressing exactly the way a queen would not. Your aunt, reading over your shoulder, makes a sound that is not approval and not disapproval. The newspapers report on the wig first. It is large and dark, and does not look like anything a queen would select. It looks like something chosen by someone who has decided that spectacle is a better argument than dignity. The dress underneath it is not the soft, deferential white muslin that would have signalled humility to the lords. It is not the measured, staged black of mourning that might have conjured sympathy. It is something in between. Something that belongs to no category the room knows how to process. The room is very good at processing categories. She has given them nothing to file. What she understands is what every woman who has sat through a season understands. You dress for the audience, not for yourself, pale and yielding for the men who will select you, dark and appropriate for the men who will judge you. Caroline has walked into the most watched room in England and dressed for no one in it. Your aunt sets the newspaper down. She picks it up again. The lords expected contrition, or at minimum its costume. A widow's black would have been too much. A pure white would have read as mockery. There is a soft, sober, and quietly conciliatory grey. The grey of second mourning, of measured grief, of a woman who has absorbed the correct lesson that would have landed precisely right. Caroline does not wear soft grey. She is not performing the trial they prepared for. She is performing a different one entirely, in a different theatre, for an audience that isn't in the room. A footman named Griggs, who brings your household the Morning Chronicle each morning, has started lingering an extra moment at the door. He holds the paper out with both hands, which he does not normally do. He doesn't say anything. He just waits until you've taken it before he turns back. Even Griggs has opinions about the trial. The dress isn't the only argument. Caroline has been living abroad for 6 years, moving through Europe with a household that the prosecution has described at length, and the charges against her are the kind that require witnesses and diagrams and a great deal of uncomfortable Latin. But the press keeps returning to the dress. The Morning Post runs a description of her appearance at each session. The Morning Chronicle, more sympathetic, describes the same dress differently. The fabric is the same fabric, the colour is the same colour, and the two accounts are basically two different women in two different rooms. The paper you read determines the queen you see. The bill of pains and penalties is eventually withdrawn in November. The Lords pass it by a thin enough margin that the government drops it rather than send it to Commons. Caroline is not divorced. She is also not, in any meaningful sense, queen. She will be barred from the coronation the following year. She'll die in August 1821, 3 weeks after being turned away at the door of Westminster Abbey. The press will describe her final illness. They will not describe what she wore. Your aunt folds the newspaper to the section about the withdrawal of the bill. She doesn't say that Caroline won. She doesn't say that Caroline lost. She says that the whole thing was handled very badly, by everyone, on all sides. This is the most she will commit to. In a house where the walls are not especially thick and opinions about the royal family are the kind of thing that travel. You watch your brother get ready for dinner, and you observe that his rules are not your rules. He wears a dark navy coat, a buff waistcoat, white linen, and no colour whatsoever. He has spent 90 minutes on the tying of his cravat. He is, in his way, a follower of a man named Brummel, who has stripped colour from men's dress entirely and replaced it with cleanliness, cut, and the absolute absence of ornament. Your brother's wardrobe is austere. Your wardrobe is full of code. The two systems coexist, and they are not the same system. Beau Brummel, George Bryan Brummel, born 1778, a man of no great title and no inherited fortune, has accomplished something genuinely strange. He has convinced the English aristocracy that elegance means refusing to be interesting. No embroidery, no gold braid, no jeweled buttons announcing your family's position in the universe. Just dark wool, immaculate linen, and a cravat tied with such architectural precision that grown men have been known to stop and stare. Your brother takes up to 90 minutes on the cravat alone. Brummel himself reportedly took 5 hours to dress, start to finish. He also sent his boots to the country to be polished with champagne. The champagne does not improve the leather in any measurable way. That is, in a sense, the point. For men, the revolution is toward restraint. Colour retreats. Dark navy, dark green, black, buff, and white linen become the entire permitted vocabulary of the well-dressed gentleman. A man who shows up to a dinner party in canary yellow or peacock blue is not making a bold statement. He is making a social error. Colour on a man signals either that he hasn't received the news yet, or that he received it and didn't care, which is arguably worse. The cravat is the one permitted site of personal expression, and even then, the expression is purely structural. A waterfall fold versus a mathematical versus a trône d'amour, assessed with the intensity that your set applies to almost nothing else. Meanwhile, you are managing an entirely different document. Your wardrobe communicates your age, your marital status, your family's grief schedule, your politics, if your family has declared any, your moral character, as currently assessed by the neighbourhood, and your income. All simultaneously, without your being allowed to annotate any of it. Your brother's coat says, "I am a man of good taste who has read the current standard and complied." Your dress says everything else. The systems are not equally demanding. They are not even close. Your brother finishes the cravat. He assesses it in the mirror. A footman named Peters stands 2 feet behind him, holding a second cravat in reserve, expression neutral, demonstrating with his entire body the professional commitment to invisibility. Your brother frowns slightly at his reflection, then nods. It is correct. He is ready. It has taken 90 minutes, and the result is a man who appears to have made no effort whatsoever. That is the achievement. And so here we are at the end of the day. The room is quiet, the plate is back in its drawer, the crape is folded over the back of a chair. You've stood at the edge of a card room, calculating whether your green was Shields, and whether the apprentice's hands at the back of the shop meant what you thought they meant. You've worn the matte black. You've gotten through the assembly. Thank you for spending the evening here with me. You're not being read tonight. Your hemline is no one's problem. Let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench, let the blanket settle exactly where it is. The crape stays in the trunk. The wardrobe has, at last, no opinions. Sleep well.